Many people can agree that Invincible is not a show for the weak and that it definitely takes a strong stomach to watch. From episodes of Mark getting to know his powers in a classic Peter Parker-esque way to bashing Conquest's head to a pulp with his own, it's safe to say the show has extremely dark periods. But what if I told you there was a darker, more disturbing side to some of these scenes stemming from the comics that was simply put too disgusting to bring to the small screen? These scenes not only make you think just how much we were protected from in the show, but go as far as to make you feel a sense of unease and disgust in regards to a superhero story that on the surface is bright and colorful. This video will cover 5 of the most gruesome scenes in the Invincible comics that were so dark they became deemed as teacher turning students into death bombs. In season 1, we're introduced to a character who at first glance seems like just another arrogant genius. D.A. Sinclair, a previous student at Upstate University, was obsessed with fixing humanity's flaws. But what begins as a way of viewing the world quickly descends into something far more disturbing. Sinclair isn't just a theorizer, he puts his thoughts to work. He takes real human beings, other students, and surgically transforms them into mechanized corpses that he calls reanimate. He doesn't ask. He abducts, straps them down in his underground lab, silences their screams, and replaces their humanity with steel. We first see the horror through Mark's friend William, whose boyfriend Rick is turned into one of these walking nightmares. It's chilling because Sinclair isn't a villain with cosmic goals. He's a normal human being who genuinely believes he's helping the world. In his words, humans are weak, and their weaknesses are simply engineering problems waiting to be solved. When Invincible discovers what's going on, he's horrified. But Sinclair doesn't see himself as evil. He sees himself as efficient. Even after he's stopped, he's not locked up. Instead, the government puts him to work, and in later seasons, he's recruited by Cecil to build an army of reanimen to fight off the looming Viltrumite war. However, at this point, they're made from corpses and not living people, but the ethics still remain on a fine line between evil and good. But if you thought D.A. Sinclair's arc was terrifying, what didn't make it into the show is even worse. In the comics, before D.A. Sinclair ever even showed up, there was another teacher. His name was David Hiles, a high school physics teacher at Reginald Vell Johnson High. He was once a respected weapons engineer, trusted with military secrets and technology most of us couldn't begin to understand. But all of that unraveled after his son took his own life. The trauma broke him. His marriage collapsed, he lost his job, and whatever piece of his mind remained intact started to erode. That's when he took a job at Mark Grayson's high school. He walked the halls like any other teacher. No one suspected a thing. Then, students started going missing. It wasn't a typical missing persons case. These weren't kids sneaking off or running away. They were vanishing, only to reappear in horrifying circumstances as living time bombs. David Hiles was kidnapping his own students, strapping explosive devices to their chests, and sending them to school like weapons in disguise. His reasoning: he believed today's youth were lazy, distracted, and undeserving. They went to parties, drank, played sports, wasted time at the mall. In his twisted view, these weren't just poor choices. They were crimes against productivity and against discipline. And he saw himself as the judge, jury, and executioner. One of the most haunting scenes in the comics is when Hiles sends a student with an explosive into the school with no warning, no explanation, just a silent, unwilling weapon. The panels drip with dread. It's a brutal commentary on control, grief, and the thin line between a mentor and a monster. But Hiles wasn't done. He had one final explosion planned. On a gray morning in the comics timeline, Mark and Adam Eve find themselves facing off against their former teacher. Not as a man anymore, but as a bomb. Hiles had surgically implanted explosives into his own body. He gave up on the idea of fixing the world. Now, he just wanted to go out in a blaze of blood and vengeance. In his final confrontation, the tension is unbearable. His chest is blinking red, the timer's almost out, and just before he explodes, Invincible flies him all the way to Antarctica. In midair, his body erupts into flame. There's no saving him, no redemption arc, just a man broken by the world who chose to break others in return. And what makes this storyline even more unsettling is how grounded it is. Unlike D.A. Sinclair, who operated in the shadows of science fiction, David Hiles felt real. He wasn't some rogue genius trying to defeat death. He was a grieving father, a bitter man who turned his trauma into violence. If this arc had been adapted for the show, it would have added a whole new layer of psychological horror. It's not aliens, not immortal space warriors. It's a teacher, someone trusted with the care and guidance of children, quietly plotting revenge under fluorescent lights and stacks of homework. This is the kind of horror that doesn't wear a cape or wield a laser gun. It walks the halls unnoticed, smiles during parent-teacher conferences, and leaves behind nothing but smoke, scorched concrete, and unanswered questions. There's a reason this storyline is mostly forgotten. It's uncomfortable, it's raw. For a comic that's already known for gut-wrenching violence, this one stood out because it wasn't about power, it was about the abuse of it. The show chose not to adapt this arc, but in many ways, it's one of the darkest moments in the entire Invincible comics. A man who lost everything and decided everyone else should too. Amber being a victim of domestic abuse. In the Invincible show, Amber Bennett is one of the more grounded, stable presences in Mark Grayson's chaotic life. She's strong-willed, passionate about social justice, and not afraid to call out Mark when he lies to her. From the very beginning, the show paints her as more than just the love interest. Even when the relationship crumbles due to Mark's superhero double life, she isn't portrayed as irrational. She's hurt, disappointed, but ultimately still cares about him. And by season 2, Amber returns with more emotional maturity and offers support to Mark during his healing from his father's betrayal. It's a pretty respectful depiction, but in the comics, things were different and much darker than you would think. In an overlooked moment from the early issues, buried between battles with aliens and awkward teen romance, there is a disturbing piece of Amber's backstory that is barely discussed in the fandom present day. And it's not because it's unimportant, it's because it's uncomfortable. Amber dated someone before Mark. His name was Gary. In the show, he's a throwaway background character. But in the comics, he was something else entirely. Gary was abusive. This wasn't just hinted at. It wasn't something open to interpretation or vaguely implied in some panel. It was stated outright. Gary didn't just yell. He hit her, manipulated her, and overall made her feel small. It was one of the rare moments that Invincible, a comic known for splattering brains across walls and showcasing superpowered mass killings, stopped to depict something even more terrifying, real-life violence. The kind that doesn't come from space invaders or rogue Viltrumites. Kind that hides in bedrooms, behind locked doors. There's a specific issue where Mark finds out about what Gary did, and he doesn't take it well. This isn't the usual hero saves the girl scene. It's raw, ugly, personal. Mark doesn't fly off to some villain's lair or punch a monster through a building. He tracks down Gary and confronts him. And the worst part, Gary acts like it's not a big deal. Like it was just a phase. Like Amber had already forgiven him, because that's how abusers think. That the past is something they can bury, that if no one talks about it, it never happened. What makes this scene so haunting is how close it is to reality. Mark doesn't pulverize him, he doesn't deliver a superhero speech. He makes him understand, quietly, that if he ever touches her again, even looks at her wrong, it won't end with a warning. And Gary listens. Not because he's changed, but because, for once, someone stronger than him cared enough to step in. It's a rare moment of Invincible leaning into social realism. And it stings because it feels like something we've seen before. Not in the comics, not in cartoons, but in real life. Court cases, in social media posts, in whispered stories from people we know. The show chose not to adapt this storyline, and that decision, depending on who you ask, was either respectful or a missed opportunity. Because here's the thing, in the show, Amber is confident, empowered, someone who walks away from toxic situations and demands better. In the comics, that version of her was earned, the hard way. She wasn't just born strong, she became that way. Through pain, through healing, through someone finally standing up for her when no one else did. Now imagine you didn't know this. Imagine you only knew the animated version of Amber. Then one day, like some late night internet rabbit hole, you stumble across a comic panel. just a conversation between Mark and a man named Gary. You read it once, then again, and you realize this wasn't fan fiction. This wasn't a what if. This was canon, which would change everything. You might scroll back through the show and look at Amber differently. Not weaker, not damaged, but resilient. Because suddenly you realize the version of her you saw on screen might have gone through hell off screen, and we just never saw it. There's a kind of horror that doesn't involve monsters. There's a kind that lives in the mundane. A high school girl smiling through bruises. An abuser pretending to be reformed. A hero unsure if he's done enough. That's the horror of Amber's comic arc. It's not about powers, it's about powerlessness and what happens when you take it back. And maybe that's why the show didn't go there. Maybe the writers felt it was too much, too real. Or maybe they didn't want to burden Amber's character with a trauma she was finally allowed to escape in this adaptation. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. The abuse storyline was erased. No reference, no flashbacks, no confrontation, just gone. But it happened, and if you read the comics, you know the truth. That behind every strong, smiling panel of Amber Bennett was a looming shadow. Bulletproof's tragic backstory. In the Invincible show, Bulletproof is introduced pretty briefly in terms of backstory. Zandale Randolph shows up as a member of the Guardians of the Globe. He flies, he punches, he stands in a lineup of heroes and throws down when the story demands it. His role so far is surface level, another powerful backup fighter in a show full of them. We know almost nothing about him. No backstory, no emotional depth, no trauma, just his codename and powers. But in the comics, Zandale's past is something else entirely, and once you know it, you'll understand exactly why the show didn't adapt it. Most fans of the comics remember Zandale as the guy who temporarily took over as Invincible, a solid hero. But if you peel back the panels buried in later issues of the Invincible comic run, you'll find a story that's less about heroism and more about abuse, family dysfunction, and a murder covered up like a forgotten crime scene. Zandale had a twin brother. His name was Tyrone. And while most twins grow up close, inseparable even, Zandale and Tyrone couldn't have been more different. Zandale was a free spirit, a painter. Tyrone was the prodigy, the golden child. Their parents, especially their mother, loved Tyrone, worshipped him, and they let Zandale know it. He was treated like a mistake, the kind of son parents pretend to be proud of at PTA meetings, but insult behind closed doors. Tyrone, he was just obsessed with superpowers. He didn't want to be a hero, he wanted to create them. One night, he crossed the line. Without warning, he drugged his brother. While Zandale lay unconscious, Tyrone injected him with a serum designed to unlock superhuman potential, using their identical DNA as a test subject. The experiment worked, but Tyrone didn't live to see the results. His body disintegrated right there in the lab. Zandale woke up to ash. Now, that's already pretty dark, but it gets worse. Zandale kept the powers, and with time, he tried to use them for good. He adopted the name Bulletproof, but he never told his parents what happened that night. Instead, he told them a lie, that he was Tyrone. Zandale pretended to be his dead twin, just to finally get his parents' approval. To hear them say, "We're proud of you." To have them look at him in the way they used to look at Tyrone. It worked, and he kept the lie going for years, till the truth came crashing down like a building rotted with foundations. One night, Zandale broke. He told them the truth, how Tyrone had used him, how the experiment killed him. How Zandale had been wearing someone else's identity like a mask made of guilt and shame. They didn't believe him, not for a second. His mother called him a murderer. She picked up a phone and threatened to call the police. His father attacked Carla, Zandale's girlfriend, and punched her so hard she hit the floor. When Zandale tried to stop him, he snapped his father's neck in a burst of panic and instinct. His mother was next. Carla grabbed a skillet and smashed her skull with it, ending the fight in one brutal blow. And in that moment, Bulletproof, the hero, was gone. What followed was less a cover-up and more a ritual. Zandale and Carla staged a car crash. They dumped the bodies, lit the wreckage, and attended the funeral like grieving children. Zandale gave a eulogy for the parents he killed. People hugged him, told him how strong he was, how proud Tyrone would have been. They had no idea the ashes weren't from the fire, and it doesn't end there. Later in the comics, Bulletproof starts working with Rex. He betrays the Guardians. His face is mutilated by a bomb. Rex offers to fix it with his tech, offers him a new face, a clean slate, but Zandale refuses. He wants the scars. He needs them. He says they remind him of the things he's done, of the people he's hurt, of how far he's fallen. And maybe that's the most disturbing part, because Zandale isn't a villain. He's a man who tried, who failed, who lied, killed, buried the evidence, and kept flying away. Bulletproof is what happens when trauma doesn't turn you into a monster, but into something quieter, more broken. Something that keeps going because it has to. Now imagine if that was in the show. If we had one flashback to a parent's lifeless body limp on a kitchen floor, a bloodied skillet, a son breathing heavy, staring at what he'd done. It would change everything about how we see him. Instead, the show gave us a blank slate, flying tank in the background, but the comic gives us a slow burn tragedy disguised as a superhero origin. And maybe that's why most people don't talk about Bulletproof's backstory. Not because it's irrelevant, but because it feels too close to reality. The worst thing Zandale ever did wasn't snapping his father's neck. It was pretending he hadn't, wearing someone else's name, becoming a hero, and hoping no one would ever find out. Anissa's assault on Mark. Now, for this next one, although it technically takes place relatively soon after Season 3's ending in the show in relation to the comic book counterpart, it's still something very disturbing that was left behind in different scenes between Anissa and Mark. In the show so far, Anissa has been introduced as a disciplined, rational, and terrifying Viltrumite warrior. Cold, but not needlessly cruel. She's brutal in combat, but every word she speaks is delivered with a tone of reason and even mercy. She tells Mark the Viltrumites don't want to destroy Earth if they don't have to. She offers him the chance to stand with them, choosing persuasion over slaughter, diplomacy over bloodshed. But that diplomacy, it had a ticking clock in the comics, and when it ran out, Anissa stopped asking. In the show, we've only seen the beginning of her arc, a few tense conversations, a battle, a warning, but in the comics, they go further, much further. And what comes next is something so dark, so brutally real that to this day, it has never been mentioned again in most adaptations. It's not just disturbing, it's unadaptable. When Anissa shows up again in the comics, her approach isn't soft anymore. She isn't there to talk. She isn't there to convince Mark. She's there to take what she wants. It starts off like any other confrontation in the Invincible universe. Tense, but manageable. Mark's caught off guard, but still thinks he's just dealing with another ideological face-off. Another round of join us or die. But Anissa isn't there to kill him. She wants a child. She tells him Viltrumites need to repopulate, that he's squandering his genetics, that choosing to be with a human woman and refusing to breed a strong kid is a betrayal of his legacy. Mark tells her no. Once, twice, again. He says no like it's supposed to mean something, but it doesn't. Anissa pins him down. He resists, but she's too strong. He begs her to stop. She doesn't. And then it happens. Anissa assaults Mark. Full page sequence that shows his face contorted, ashamed, and broken. The strongest hero on Earth, rendered powerless not by an alien, but by someone who was supposed to be a part of his own bloodline. It's quiet. Too quiet. The way Kirkman lays out the scene makes your stomach sink. You don't flip the page out of curiosity, you flip it out of dread. Keep thinking it's going to stop. It doesn't. When it's over, she flies away. No remorse, no acknowledgement, just a sentence that still echoes in the fandom to this day: I'll see you soon. The aftermath is even worse. Mark doesn't talk about it. Not to his friends, not to Eve, not even to himself. The next time he mentions Anissa, it's with a sense of numb detachment. He's not trying to explain what happened. He's just surviving, which is what victims do. And the fandom, they weren't ready. Reddit threads were locked, comment sections flooded with debate. Was it necessary? Was it too far? Was it handled right? But even those people asking those questions felt sick doing so, because no matter how you framed it, Mark was violated. and the story never fully gave him justice. And it didn't stop there. Anissa becomes pregnant. She gives birth to Marky, a child born from an act of violence, but no one forgot what came before, because how could you? Now imagine that making it into the show. Imagine an animated scene, stylized, voiced, scored, trying to portray a moment like that. The silence, the sobbing, the way Mark lies in the dirt afterwards, staring at nothing. You can't, because it wouldn't air. It would break the tone, break the format, break the trust. Anissa's assault isn't just the darkest moment in Invincible, it's one of the most jarring twists in comic book history. Not because it's shocking, but because it's so grounded in real world horror. This wasn't a betrayal, it was a crime, and the show, it walked away from that panel. So far, Anissa is a conqueror, soldier, threat, but the question still lingers for fans of the source material. Will they ever go there? Or did the creative team look at that script page, read the line, "I'll see you soon," and simply say no? Debbie's struggle with alcoholism. In the Invincible animated series, Debbie Grayson stands as a pillar of strength. After the truth comes out about her husband Nolan being Omni-Man, a mass murderer alien sent to conquer Earth, Debbie is shattered, but not destroyed. We see her grieve, we see her process, but she never lets herself spiral completely. She cries in silence, pours herself a drink, and gets back up again. By the end of season 2, she's caring for baby Oliver, supporting Mark emotionally, and even putting herself back into the world, despite the betrayal that nearly ripped her life apart. But in the comics, Debbie fell hard. There's a reason the scene from the show where Mark silently embraces her with no words and just grief hits so hard. Because if you've read the comics, you know what it could have been, what it was. This wasn't just a story about loss. It was about blame, and it was ugly. In the early issues of the comics, Nolan leaves Earth after nearly killing his son in front of the entire planet. He tells Debbie that she meant nothing to him, that she was a pet, that Mark was simply a breeding project, and then he vanishes. No funeral, no apology, and no closure. Just blood in the sky, silence in the house, and a wedding photo that didn't mean anything anymore. At first, Debbie locks herself inside. She doesn't talk to anyone. She doesn't eat. Her world is gone. But then, like so many people who experience that level of loss, she turns to something else. She starts drinking. Not sipping, not a glass of wine after dinner. She spirals out of control. In one particularly devastating issue, Mark walks into the kitchen and finds her slumped at the table, a bottle in one hand, her wedding ring on the counter, and vomit in the sink. Her eyes don't register him at first, and when they do, they're full of anger. That panel, that was the one that hit hardest, because she doesn't beg for forgiveness. She looks at her son, the only person left in her life, and says, "Why did you have to fight him, Mark? Why did you have to drive him away?" The blame, the weight of it. This wasn't the loving mother who stood by Mark in the show. This was a woman shattered into pieces, and the only piece still within reach was rage. Because it's easier to hate the person who stayed than to mourn the one who left. It's easier to drink than to face the silence. And that's what made Comic Debbie feel real. Not heroic, not graceful, just real. She would spiral deeper before ever finding a way back. Her home became a mausoleum. The phone stopped ringing. Friends stopped visiting. And when Mark did show up, she made it clear, whether or not she meant to, that she held him responsible. This wasn't just a low point for Debbie. It was a turning point for Mark. If you think about it, he's just a teenager trying to understand what being a hero even means. He's already dealing with PTSD from nearly dying at the hands of his own father, and now the one person he thought he could lean on is telling him he did the wrong thing by surviving. In contrast, the Invincible show handled this differently. That same post-fight moment exists, but it's silent. When Mark returns home after the Omni-Man battle, Debbie doesn't scream. She doesn't drink herself to sleep, she just falls into his arms. There's no dialogue, just shared pain. And that's beautiful. It's one of the most powerful scenes in the series, but in the comics, that moment had words, and those words cut. Eventually, Debbie does find a path forward. She starts working again, gets her real estate license, bonds with baby Oliver. She even begins dating a kind man named Paul. But that journey wasn't clean, it wasn't noble, it was messy, and full of backslides. And that's the part the show skipped. Not because it was too violent, but because it was too human. Because when people talk about Invincible being dark, they usually mean people getting ripped in half, eyeballs flying across buildings, and people's heads getting crushed. But the darkest thing in this story was a mother looking for her son in the eye and saying it was his fault. In the show, Debbie Grayson is resilient. In the comics, she's real. And that realism was just too raw to bring to the small screen. Now, these are just some of the most disturbing moments to come from the Invincible comics, and there are plenty more we are waiting to see if the show will adapt or not. Regardless, in its 3-season run, it's evident the series has cut corners for some of these sequences, and depending on who you ask, it may be for better or for worse. Unfortunately, I had to blur out lots of the images shown in the video because YouTube would most likely not let me upload it due to the gore and genuinely disturbing contents of some of these panels. So if you want early access, ad-free, uncensored videos, and your name at the end, go check out my Patreon and see what interests you. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel and join my Discord to discuss your favorite pieces of media, and as well, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.